My name is Jonny Mullan, and it's my honour just to bring a teaching to you today as part of this creative arts elective that you've embarked on. Today we're going to be looking at the topic of creativity in me. I'm going to explore a few things in that. So let's just jump straight in and get on with the lesson, and hopefully we'll learn something constructive that we can bring, whatever your background, whatever it is that your role is in church or the wider ministry or a volunteer. I hope that this encourages you and even challenges your thinking as well a little bit on this topic. So thanks for listening to me. We're going to look at a few things. We're going to first of all discover the how and why of creativity, how we were created, why we were created, the need that we have to be creative, where did that come from? And then possibly the big question is the how. How do we actually put that into practice? So we have this desire within us to be creative, to create things and to create new opportunities and ways of doing things. But how do we implement that in our different roles and spheres in church or further afield? Then we're going to look at a few examples, biblical practice, some verses that will help us to understand that there's a theology behind this, that this isn't just something we do because we like to be trendy or we like to be contemporary or up to date, but this is something that we can do because it's in us. It's a biblical principle, the last of the biblical texts written over 2,000 years ago, and so we're bringing it right up to date and we're applying those principles today to our lives as followers of Jesus who want to be creative the way we have been made. So welcome. That's what we're going to be looking at. By way of, I suppose, measuring our learning, I've put these learning outcomes for you. I know that Pastor Brian will have some of these notes as well for you, and maybe these presentations for you to go back. So hopefully you can see that. And if you can't, don't worry, you'll be able to access this material through SALT. Again, here's the 5 things I suppose that we're going to look at. We're going to look at having a working definition of what it means to be creative. What is creativity? And we talk about it, but let's define it. Let's decide what it means. Let's come to a working knowledge of that. Secondly, let's understand how and why we have been created. Thirdly, let's have an approach to the creative process. There are lots of approaches to lots of different things, but if we take this topic of being creative, what approach should we take? Thirdly, let's be familiar with the biblical context. And fifthly, let's know how to apply these appropriately. What we're going to do then is we're going to go through these one by one. And then at the end, we'll be able to go back to these outcomes and decide, look, did I do that? Have we understood that fully? And if there's things and the answer is yes, well, that's great. But if there are areas of this that aren't clear, then perhaps that's another area you can explore a bit further, or come back to one of your tutors or lectures and just say, look, I don't fully understand this particular aspect of this topic, and go back and just plug the gaps, so to speak. So that's where we're going. Always think in any journey, it's handy to know where you're starting, where you hope to end up, and now this is the middle bit. So let's launch in and let's just study this together. First thing really is to talk about a definition of what it means to be creative. And look, if you Google this or if you look through different books and writings, you'll discover hundreds, thousands of ways of looking at it. I've picked out a couple of things that are, I think, helpful for us. And the first one, just read this. I know that the print's a little bit small for you, probably where you are, but let's look at this first one. It says, creativity is the act of turning new and imaginative ideas into reality. Okay, so you're taking an imaginative idea and you're bringing it into reality. Creativity is characterized by the ability to perceive the world in new ways. So there's a way of looking at things that's different to everybody else. To find hidden patterns, to make connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, and to generate solutions. Creativity involves 2 processes: thinking, then producing. I quite like that. I think that's helpful. That in a broad way, there's a thinking process then there's a production process. And in our lives, lots of us do lots of thinking. Some people are driven by activity. Some people are so driven by activity that they don't stop and think that if their productivity and what they're doing could be done better or in a different way. Other people are good at the thinking and not so good about the doing. The Bible says that we are not just to be readers of the word and listeners to the word, but doers of it. In other words, the thinking and the processing, the imagination, the vision of the thing is important, but the working out of it is equally important, and you need the two together. And that's why I like this definition: thinking, producing. In a worship team, for example, there are those on the platform, there are those that are visible, and there are those who are further back involved in the production. Sometimes we give more weight to what's on the platform than behind the scenes, where actually creativity is at both ends of this process. Here's a great challenge at the bottom of this: if you have ideas but you don't act on them, you are imaginative, but you're not creative. And so let's debunk that myth first and foremost, that creative people are just people that sit in a room somewhere in a beanbag and they don't produce anything. No, the production comes out of the thinking, but the two together is what makes it creative. What is creative, someone else has said, an act of creativity can be grand and inspiring, such as creating a beautiful painting or designing an innovative new product, but an idea need not be artistic or world-changing to count as creative. Life requires daily acts of ingenuity and novel workarounds. In this sense, almost everyone possesses some amount of creativity from Psychology Today. You see, the world will recognize that creativity, there are people who are creatives. We think of them as the geeks. We think of them as the ones who kind of are in the computer room, tucked away from the rest of us who are in reality. But creativity isn't just that. It's not just even the grand gestures, the amazing art, the amazing music, and yet it does include so much of that, and we need to pay attention to that. But it could be daily acts of ingenuity. So all of us, to a degree, are creative. We're going to discover that's because we were made by a creative God, a creative being, who has made us in his likeness. And part of that likeness is to be able to reproduce and to produce things. And then finally, creativity is the process of bringing something new into being. That's a very obvious statement, but it's good. And here's what's involved behind that. Creativity requires passion and commitment. It brings to our awareness what was previously hidden and points to new life. The experience is one of heightened consciousness. And this person, Rollo May, even says ecstasy. In other words, there's a joy in it. And I feel that creativity has a joy to it. There's a satisfaction built into being creative that goes to the core of who we are, because it answers part of that question that we all have. Why am I here? What's it for? What's my purpose? What's my reason? And when we create, we become like the Creator. And there's a satisfaction, there's a joy involved in that. So here, look, having looked at that, and look, you could look at 1,000,000 of these, but having looked at that, here's my take, if you like, on what you could define creativity as being. Creativity is bringing something new to life. Begins with imagining, vision and thinking, but must move to action and production. I think it brings us joy. If it brings us satisfaction and a joy in our creativity, it's not just for self, but it brings something new to life. I think that's what creativity is. Visioning, but bringing something out of nothing that was never there. It should add to our life. So there are 5 keys, if you like, to unlocking your God-given creativity. Let's go and look at these for a few moments. We're going to discover that the origins of our creativity, give us a clue, a key as to why we're productive, why we're creative, why we want to even be like that. We're going to look for a few moments at the creative types. We want to understand that whilst we're all creative to a degree because we're all made in God's image, some of us are more tuned to be creative in our thinking and production processes than others. It's a gift. And for those of us that are like that, well, let's explore that for a few moments. We're going to look at inspiration. Where does our inspiration come from? You're an artisan. You're crafting something with your life for the joy and purpose of others as an act of worship to God. Where do you get inspiration? What do you do when the well dries up? You've got writer's block, or your songwriting just doesn't seem to be taken off the way it did. Or your way of seeing new things, the way of seeing an opportunity in a challenge suddenly isn't there anymore. How do you get inspired again? How do you record things? Like, how do you literally catalogue your journey? Is there any value in that anyway? And finally, understanding the rhythms of life, understanding that we're different, that we all have a different approach to being creative, and that actually that's important to tap into and know yourself. How you were made will help you release the incredible potential that's in you to be creative. I've dropped in a few Erwin McManus quotes along the way. There are, of course, lots of other people that you can read and refer to, but he's particularly interesting. And I like this one. You're an artist. What work of art will you leave behind? Because even studying this module right now, it's useful, it's practical, it's relevant to your journey. It's another module you can tick off, maybe write an assignment on, I don't know. But the point is there's a bigger appreciation of this. This is life lesson. This is something that you can bring with you. This isn't just a lesson to learn for a module in a Bible theological course at church. No, this is a life lesson. The lesson is you are an artist. God has made you to be creative. You're building and creating a life. You're making a legacy. You're going to leave something behind. What will people say about you when you're gone? What mark will you make, not just for your life or the nation that you're in, but what mark will you make for the kingdom of God? What are you making? What's your legacy? Will you be a life that people will remember? You know, any of you have seen a great work of art. For example, the Mona Lisa. You go and you see it's hanging on the wall in the Louvre, and it's amazing. And you study it and you look at it, and people ponder it, and people ask questions. Who was she? Why did she inspire Leonardo so much? Why was that, smile? What was it saying? Was it disdain? Was it joy? Was it cynicism? But she's left a mark, and the artist has left us with questions, but left us something to look at. I live my life as a Christian. Will people be looking at my life in generations to come and say, that Jonny Mullan guy, what did he leave behind? What impact, what difference did he make? Would the world be different because of what I contributed to it? Would the kingdom of God be different and stronger because of what I brought to it? That's the question we all have to answer. So quickly, the origin of creativity. Of course, your mind goes back to Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If you were to read on, you discover that he made it. It was formless and without shape. So there was something there, but he took it. Of course, he made what was there, but he took it and he shaped it. He made it into everything that we know. He is the origin of creativity. So never as a creative type, as a worshiper, as a photographer, as an artist, as a stage designer, whatever it is that's your particular niche, Never look at what you've made or produced and said, I made that. I did that. Well, you did, but you did it because everything that you had, all the materials, all the thinking, all the wherewithal came from him. You see, he's the source. He gives it to us and enables us to do it. He's the source. He's the origin. Genesis 1 goes on and said, and here's just a snippet for you, tells us a little bit about the character of God. And as we discover who he is in creation, we discover the way we ought to be in creation. So God created the great creatures and every living thing which the water teems with and moves about it according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. You know, apparently, we read over that and we think, oh, okay, all the birds, amazing. And all the fish, amazing. Well, there are approximately 10,000 different species of birds in the world and 18,000 species of fish. Never mind the other sea creatures. What's the point? God just doesn't make a fish. He doesn't just make a bird. They're not just functional. A bird isn't just something with two wings that can fly. There's a pelican, there's a flamingo, there's a puffin, there's an eagle, there's a hummingbird, and on and on and on it goes. Amazing variety, rich with difference, rich with colour, with sound, with beauty, with strength, with delicacy, and the whole remit in between. I'm telling you today that because God wants us in our creativity not just to be functional. He wants us to be passionate, to use all the colours of the palette, all the notes in the scale, and just to be the type of creators that he is. The other thing I observe is that, of course, in our Genesis account, when you read in other cultures, God has set these creation stories right across the globe. Even other religions that aren't Christian acknowledge that there was a creation story. What's the point? The point is that although we understand the Bible account to be the accurate account, God has impressed on all of humanity the fact that our roots are in him. That ultimately he is the origin of all life, of all beauty, of all aesthetics, of all creativity. And so we are confident in our creation and in our Creator. There's a great book, if you ever get to get a hold of it. It's by a guy called Don Richardson. He is an anthropologist, a Christian. I've read it many times. It's a great book. It's called Eternity in Their Hearts. And he goes through how all the different cultures of the world have stories and legends in them that can be traced back to God, giving them signs in their own culture and their own history of the Genesis account. Worth a read. So God created mankind in his own image. We are created by a creator to be creative people. Again, Erwin McManus says, again, look him up, lots of different books worth reading by him. Mosaic Church in Los Angeles, again, a collective really of very creative people, people from the film industry, artists, musicians, and so on. But again, he says, if God imagined you at birth, what makes you think he stopped imagining you now? Let me tell you, Genesis, when you close the book of Genesis, that wasn't the end of creation. He's still imagining things for you to do, for you to create, for you to make, for you to pursue, for you to produce. You know, in the universe, they tell us, astronomers, that it's still growing. That when God said, let there be light, let there be stars, let there be planets, that he never told them to stop. And the universe still is expanding, even as we speak, still creating. And so we know that God is a creative God. and he's made us to be creative. Revelation 4 in the New Testament says, "You're worthy, O Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power." Why? "For you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." My point is that sometimes as Christians, we put the creative power of God aside and we focus so much on the redemption and so much on the gospel that we forget that the gospel started with God creating. He made us. The very first attribute that God wanted to share with us in the Bible was God made. And so it's worthy, he's worthy of our praise and worship, even just alone for the fact that he made us. The heavens declare the glory of our God. Timothy says, 1 Timothy says, 4 verse 4, "Everything God created is good. Nothing is to be rejected if it's received with thanksgiving." It's inherently good. Why? Because of the source, because of where it came from. And Ephesians 2:10, I love this. "We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, prepared in advance for us to do." Creation, the story of creation, the Creator God, we are creations created by the Creator to create more and more creators. And so it goes on. No wonder God said to Noah when he left the ark, "Go forth, multiply, inhabit the earth. Grow this place. More people, more things, more cities, more towns, more villages, more strategies, more businesses, more farms, more families." And so God is a God that multiplies in our lives. Erwin McManus again, "We're both works of art and artists at work." That taken from his book, The Artisan's Soul. Really good read for anyone in the creative areas, particularly of church life. But creatives are a different breed of people. There's no doubt about that. And yet Jesus says that, you know what? To come into the kingdom of heaven, you should be like a child. Part of me thinks that that is tapping into the creative process right there. Children are innocent. Children will do things that an adult will think twice about. Take, for example, the rope swing. An adult comes to a river and sees a tree and they see a place maybe where they can take a photograph. They see maybe somewhere where they might pull out a camp chair and sit and read a book. A child, not a chance. The child is throwing up a rope over a branch, is tying a bit of wood round the bottom, is swinging out as far as they can, and maybe even letting go at the other end. The imagination that a child has is not the same imagination that an adult has. A child will see that challenge of getting across the river as an opportunity for a game, as an opportunity for an adventure. You give a little boy a stick, and you know what? That's not just a stick, that's a sword. And two of them will hit each other with it or have a fight, and suddenly in their imagination they're knights of the round table or something, and they're battling for the damsel in distress. You see, a creative mind of a child sees a problem, but sees past it and sees an opportunity. Here's the process that goes on there, and this is very scientific. So I'm saying a child sees the problem and it becomes an opportunity. As adults, we've got very fancy words for things. What an adult will call it is ideation. You come up with an idea. Development. Well, we're going to decide what length of rope we need, and we're going to decide what part of the branch we're going to use to sit on. The enhancement. Well, we tried that and it didn't really work, so let's get a smaller bit of wood for that. The piloting. Well, come on, let's give it a go. Right, who's going to go first? Release, literally. Off you go. Evaluation. Ends up in the water. Right, the rope wasn't long enough. Let's do it again. And so the process continues. What I want you to see, though, is not everyone is at the same point in that process. Not everyone's the ideas person. Some people are good at the production. Some people are good at the evaluation and pointing out the pros and the cons. Often we think of the creative person as the person at the start or at the end. But if you're a creative person, you might be somewhere in the middle. All those stages are important. And in church, it's the same. The person that brings the idea mightn't be the person that brings it to completion. That's a difficult thing to understand, but it's true. The person that points out the flaws or the positive things along the journey, they're as much part of that as the person that birthed the idea. And so creativity. Let's have a look at this. The first Christian act. We've talked a little bit about the Genesis account already. But I particularly like what this writer says. Let's apply that to our own version. God saw chaos and he created order. Sometimes as Christians in the church, we see the chaos, we see the darkness. Look at the second paragraph there. And we think, all we can think of doing is gathering together in a huddled mass, circling the wagons, praying for the soon return of Jesus. You know, that's not creative. That's a mindset that's on the defense, not on the offense. God wants us to have the same DNA, the same attitude to creativity as he does. You see something without order. You create something to bring order. And here's the choice we have to make. Do we do that? Or do we sit on the fringes? See, creativity isn't just for the all singing, all dancing, modern American church. This is for every single church fellowship across the globe. You see a problem. You have a choice. Do we retreat from that, or do we move forward with creative ideas, with evaluative tools? Do we bring something to that, work it out at the end? You see, when chaos and darkness descended upon us, the first step towards light and order was creativity. That's what Jesus meant when he said, "Such are the kingdom of heaven." Your soul craves truth, beauty, and wonder. Your soul craves to dream, to imagine, to even simply to understand your soul. Your soul craves to connect, to commune, to create. It's in us. It's who we are because we have been made by a creator God to create. And so far we're learning that the origin of creativity is our God. And in creating us and understanding, that's how we as creatives should create. The same way he created. We see chaos, we intervene. Could be a thought, could be production, it could be something in between. But we're all creatives in that. Okay, so we continue here and we're looking at the third thing in our outcomes. We're looking at inspiration. So we've established that God is the origin of creativity. We've established that as creators ourselves, creative people, our approach to creativity should be the same as God's. We see chaos, we establish order. We bring ideas and we bring it to an outcome. It's not just thought, it's action. But what about inspiration? You see, we need inspiration. We need the light bulb moment. We need the moment where we understand more. We have a wisdom about the issue. I've said here that we have finite resources, but we have an infinite God. So in your church, in your ministry, wherever you are, you might be thinking, well, look, I only have this much. But actually, it's in that limitation that God brings his infinite wisdom to bear. You see, we have a limitation, a boundary of what we can work with. We've certain resources, certain funding, certain time. We are finite beings, but God sits beyond that and he is infinite. And so the great encouraging thing for us, if we learn nothing from creation, is that God makes everything out of nothing. You see, his maths and his way of working is so different to ours. So Christian creativity is different to the world's creativity. And I want to make that distinction because Christian thought is under pressure. The way that the secular world, and we will come to look at this a little bit later, is thinking is that we're limited in what we have. And yet we as Christians believe in an infinite God with everything at his disposal, therefore becoming at our disposal. Think about it. In the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus takes 5 loaves and some bread and he distributes them. And there are 12 basketfuls left over. If you study the other example of the feeding of, I think it's the 4,000, there are less people fed with more fish and bread. And there's stuff left over. Do the math. Work it out and you'll see that when God has actually given less, he can produce more and there's even more overflow. So imagine what God can do with nothing. Well, you don't need to imagine. All you need to do is open the window and have a look outside. All you need to do is look at the Discovery Channel or go to the Amazon rainforest or the Himalayas in Nepal. You know, the world is a playground for us to enjoy. Not just this world and its oceans and land, but all the planets, all of the galaxies, all of the universes. God made them all from nothing. Imagine what can happen when the infinite God with all his resource can come and bless us with our limited, finite resources. Inspiration, that's inspiring. What's also inspiring is what I've called input-output. You know, sometimes we had a bit of a dry patch and we're trying to be creative, maybe writing a song, writing a blog, I don't know, devotion, something. And it's difficult. Those are the moments where I encourage you, and it is very practical, input-output. You want an output for your productivity, for your creativity. But that's a moment when you need to be focusing on the input. So go and read somebody else. Go and be encouraged by a piece of music that somebody else has recorded. Go and read a book. Go and look at a sculpture. Be involved in receiving before you give, input-output. It's not that God can't download, and that's very trendy, modern, contemporary church language. God, of course, can download stuff to us. I know that. But what he tends to do is use people. Because in the using of people, he blesses you, but he also uses the person that has brought you that experience. And again, we need to widen the net a little bit. Perhaps go to a museum. Perhaps go and read a book from somebody in a different century. Because you'll find a wealth there, a catalogue of historical and church knowledge and experience in their cultures and their contexts that will bless and encourage you. And you can apply the principles today. There are people who have done this before us. We need to use them. Let's not be arrogant to think that in our 21st century that we have all the knowledge. No. We have so much to learn. And if the contemporary church has anything to learn, it's this. That sometimes we throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there's a whole heritage of Christian saints that have gone before us. Creatives, preachers, poets, musicians, artists that have a wealth of knowledge and experience that can inspire us to keep going. Hebrews says there's a cloud of witnesses. They're among them, cheering us on, saying, come on, yeah, you can do it. But why not read their story? Why not see their work? Why not appreciate what they have done? The natural world, we've kind of talked about that. Contagious creativity, prime the pump. Sometimes when you need inspiration, you just need to start writing. You just need to start doing something. And it comes, I call this priming the pump. Because sometimes it's like a pump, the old-fashioned pumps in the old days when I was young. They used to have a pump, and you know what? The icicles would be on it in the winter time, and they had to go out, break the icicles off, pour a bit of water in that wasn't frozen, get the pump going, and as the pump started to flow, guess what? The water flowed from behind. Here's the creative inspiration idea here. That in starting to write, the first couple of drafts aren't going to be great. It's like the muddy water still flowing. But as you get in that flow and that process, guess what? All the rubbish starts to get pushed out of the way, and the juices start flowing again. The ideas start coming, and again, the creative process is primed and you have kick-started it. That's how you sometimes can get inspiration. We talked about natural world. Change your playlist, I call this last one. You know what? Sometimes we need a change. We're surrounded so much by the familiar that a different song, a different artist maybe, a different musician, a different brand if you like, a different denomination's output, a different songwriter or a different painter. When we appreciate something that's not really ours, that's not my niche, it's not my forte, but actually there's a wealth. I'll see something in the construct of that that's inspiring. I'll give you an example. Handel's Messiah. I'm not a trained classical musician. I play keys by ear. I play acoustic guitar by ear. I'm a pretty poor singer, but I love Handel's Messiah. What I love about it is the structure. I love about it, when I delve into the history, I love the fact that he basically was a hermit for 7 or 8 days in a room, didn't hardly eat or sleep, and produced the whole thing in one go. That inspires me to keep going and being creative. Not that I'm going to do that, but that I might borrow the structural thing and apply that now to a very contemporary modern song or a hymn. It's inspiring. I'm not wanting to produce something that Handel produced, but equally I do want to produce something with the same techniques perhaps that he employed hundreds of years ago that are still around today and are a testimony actually to his great work. The process itself can inspire. Record keeping. Not very trendy, not very cool, unless you've got a moleskin notebook. Creative types love Apple Macs, they love moleskin notebooks, they love skinny jeans. You know, there's a kind of a look, isn't there? But I'm being facetious, but the truth is that actually recording stuff down is a really important part of being creative. And sometimes we forget that. The slow down, the journaling, the making notes as we go, the documenting our progress. You know, there's value in that. Nowadays, it's maybe not the moleskin notebook, it's the iPhone notes or the voice memo. Great tools that we have right to hand that we can use to record ideas, thoughts, processes, goals, challenges, observations, and so on. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because it's becoming a lost art. Measuring the journey, if you like. Because there's value in the journey. There's value in knowing where you started, looking back and saying, my goodness, do you see that draft of that first verse I wrote? My goodness, that was terrible. But understanding then that with a lot of small changes, that's now become this great statement in a song that is impacting and blessing so many others. Let me encourage you in that. Document what you're doing because you'll see the progress, you'll see the journey. And at times when you were frustrated and you wrote it down, writer's block, can't do any more, no thoughts coming. Fast forward a month later or 2 years later, the thoughts are coming now. I'm going back to that. The pump has been primed. And so you're able to record and keep a journal of the process. Very important and very beneficial. Also practical, because you'll forget stuff. So write it down, memo it in a voice recording, Do something to record the journey. That's my advice. Monitor it, evaluate it, and review it. And the next thing is know yourself. Know the rhythms of life. We're all different. Some people are morning people. Some people love the wee small hours at night. Creative people have their own space, and you know, we're all a wee bit different. And what I would say to you is try to work out your own pattern, your own best times to be creative. We all have them. For some people, again, it's first thing in the morning. Some people, they're not even conscious until 12 o'clock. But it's trial and error. Learn to know the rhythms of your own life and the seasons too. There are times of year that people are more productive than others. I'll just use an example. I was doing some postgraduate studies at one point in a former life. I was also doing a professional course, and I'd taken on a particularly responsible role, leadership role in the place I was working. And these were all compounding at the same time, and I was trying to be productive. I was actually trying to write a pretty lengthy dissertation. And that required a lot of time. My children were young. I have a wife. You have the demands of all sorts of things coming at you, and you've got to make decisions. What do you do? What I decided was there was an element of discipline here too. I decided, look, I don't want to impact on my marriage. I don't want to impact on my children. I don't want to impact on my work. So what I did was I waited until my children were in bed, and I'd spent an hour chatting, catching up the day with my wife. And then when she went to bed, I sat probably on average from 11 o'clock, sometimes to 2 in the morning, occasionally even 3 in the morning, and worked through this. And of course you can't sustain that for a long period of time. But for that season, that was the most productive time. I wrote thousands of words and edited stuff and felt it was good quality work because I got time to focus, and I didn't feel the guilt I was impacting other people. But in my life, that was a season. I couldn't sustain that forever. In fact, you'd be mad to. But that taught me that there are key moments in the rhythms of our life when we can be really productive, and other times when we need to set it aside and remember what's really important. We're all different. Now, none of this is a magic formula. We've talked about the origin of creativity. We've talked a little bit about creative people, why we are the way we are, how we bring order to chaos. We've talked about where we get our inspiration from. We've talked a little bit about keeping records and the rhythms of our life. But none of this is a magic formula, but it is effective. By drawing inspiration from God and from others, by acknowledging the many forms of innovation, and by implementing a few simple changes, your process of creativity can become demystified. Don't let anyone tell you you're not creative. You're made in the image of the most creative being in the universe. Your choice of laptop, latte, or notebook is irrelevant compared to that. Go create. Martin Saunders. Great quote. So be inspired, be encouraged to push the boundaries, to go and create, because there is a process that you can tap into. Some basic building blocks, as we've discussed, that you can employ. Let's kind of finally look at a few of the challenges. I've called this pushing the boundaries. This is an alternative look at creativity. This writer calls them the 4 I's. And these words are helpful. It just connected with me, and again, we're all different in how we connect with these things, but for me this was helpful. The first one is innate. Innate. Deeply held beliefs manifest themselves often in an uncensored expression. Think about David. Think about the Song of Songs, Solomon being the writer. When there's something in them, it's deep, it's innate, it's within them. And it's so intentional in coming out that it bursts out almost. You can't contain it. That's the way it was with David. He just explodes, if you like, with worship. And he doesn't put it through a refined process. He doesn't measure it against the latest big blockbuster movie or the latest big release worship album. He just says it like it is. Solomon's the same. Some of his material really you wouldn't be teaching in Sunday school. It's explicit. Talks about the great lovers being like the God our Redeemer and pursuing his lover. And really what I'm trying to say is that sometimes we just need to be with Jesus, need to be with God, and allow the expression of that to be what it is. Use the words that come to you. Now maybe it needs not censored, but adapted for different audiences or different viewing. But let that be the starting point. Let it be your intimate, personal worship with him that inspires you above everything else. Second thing is incarnational. The Creator interprets their emotions and expresses them through art. They give voice or image to the complex concepts that help to explain them to the listener or viewer. In other words, you take something that you're thinking about, you're musing upon, you're meditating on it. You want to bring you have this outburst and overflow of worship. You've got this gushing kind of feeling of, I want to give this back to God in some way, something creative. And then you find something that will give it voice. It will make it incarnate. In doing that, you need to know that you're giving voice to somebody else who's not as creative as you. You're allowing somebody who's not as poetic to say the words that they really mean inside. I've often experienced that, particularly in singing worship songs, where I have a feeling inside me and I just can't put my finger on the words I would use. But then suddenly someone writes a verse and I'm singing it and it's given me the opportunity to express my deepest heartfelt thanks to God. Third word is inspired. That from deep within the artist is compelled to create. That inspiration drives a person to produce. It cannot remain a thought. I think sometimes this is what Jesus meant when he said, I've come to give you life in all its fullness. Abundant life, he calls it. And it'll be like a well bubbling up from within you, overflowing, that you can't contain it. So it is when you're in the intimate presence of Jesus and you know him and you love him and you cannot do anything else but worship him, but create, but give voice, give expression to what he's done for you in your life. Inspired. And the last I, iconoclastic. And again, that's not a word you normally would see, but it's really referring to the use of icons throughout church history. Multiple expressions of faith. And again, look, if you've been around old churches, particularly around Europe, you'll see these icons from the Greek Orthodox and other traditions hanging on walls. And you think, well, that's of no relevance to my expression of Jesus right now. I'd say just be careful that you don't discard that entirely. There is a richness to looking back and understanding how others in their cultural and historic context expressed their faith. Sometimes in face of huge opposition, even to the point of persecution and death. We shouldn't discard that. But we should also look forward and explore new forms of art, emerging forms. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that we look at the icon all draped in silver and gold and we think, oh, that's so primitive. And yet we fast forward to what we're doing now in our own expressions of worship, all usually displayed on social media or on websites. And we think, oh, we're much more sophisticated now. And that may well be. sometimes we lose a little bit of the reverence. And that's an issue we can explore too sometime. But here's the thing. It didn't stop with those icons. It progressed. There were other art forms and expressions of worship and creativity that were employed that bring us now from where we were to where we are now. You know, if we'd stopped at stained glass windows and not moved on to multimedia and film, things would not have moved on. But here's the point. They can't either stop where we are now. This, where we are now, is only part of the bigger journey, where even our most contemporary modern expressions of worship and art and creativity will ultimately still just be a stage in the whole process of progress. We've got to pursue new things, always inventing, always thinking, always dreaming, always imagining something different and bringing it to the next generation. The limitations you're willing to accept establish the boundaries of your existence. If we stop just where we are now, we are doing a disservice to those that went before us and those who need us in the future. And so just as we kind of start to bring this to a close, the sacred and the secular, we mentioned it earlier. What does that even mean? I suppose I want to challenge that thought a little bit in that almost everything is up for grabs. Music and art are amoral. They're not good or evil, but they can be used for either. And my mind went back to an old 80s worship song that did the rounds back in the day. And here it is. It's taken from Revelation and it's beautiful. It says, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. And here's the bit. For thou hast all things created. Thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasures they are created. Thou art worthy, O Lord. See, everything. You can put a sacred or a secular label on it, but everything was made to worship God. So our role as creatives is to redeem everything back to its purpose, which is to glorify God. I love what Martin Luther said. This is great, isn't it? The Christian shoemaker does his duty not by putting little crosses, not by putting little crosses on the shoes, but by making good shoes. Because God is interested in good craftsmanship. Love that. What's your label? Is it a bumper sticker in your car, a t-shirt, a particular coffee shop? I don't know what it is that you define yourself by. But listen, we should be creative people who just give our best and redeem everything for God's glory. I came across this. It's called kintsugi. It's a Japanese art form. And what they do is they take broken pottery and they put it back together again. They do that by putting silver or gold strands, and as you can see the effect. What's the point? They're saying that just because it's broken doesn't mean it doesn't have value. In fact, what they do is they redeem and they restore by using gold and by finding beauty in the places God brings healing. That's what I'm saying. You see, our lives are like that. Sometimes we think that we've got to produce something so perfect and so amazing. The next big song, the next best seller. But God is interested in us taking broken pieces and building it together and producing a new art form that actually takes the broken and celebrates its recovery. That's what people's lives are like. That's what my life's been like. I'm sure that's what your life's been like. We need spiritual kintsugi. We need God to take us and to remake us into something beautiful. He's the potter, isn't he? And we're the clay. And again, of course, my mind went to this Hillsong song, Broken Vessels. All these pieces, broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, mended and whole, and so on. Take our failure, you take our weakness, you set your treasure in jars of clay. Amazing. That's the gospel, isn't it? God the Creator taking our lives, bringing us, making us more than we ever could have been. But the strand of His gold, the strand of His grace through our lives, visible for everyone to see. They were broken, they were a mess, but only by God's grace put them together. That's creativity. Taking something that was the world said couldn't be used, making it into something that glorifies God. So what's our response? What's your response today as you think about these things? Well, you have a responsibility to respond to the Creator. You have a responsibility to respond to creation, because He's given that as an expression of who He is and His greatness. And you have a responsibility to respond to creativity. You actually have a responsibility to examine how you create and how best to do that as an act of worship. We need to respond to these things with thought, vision, and action in our lives. Remember, a creator doesn't just have a thought. If that's where it stops, it's just imagination. But a creator creates, has the thought, dreams the dream, seizes the opportunity instead of the challenge, embraces the challenge, and then produces something that, even though it's imperfect, has God's grace written all over it, that can be displayed as a testimony of what God can do with His people. That's what God's done with us. That's what He wants to use us to do. And so as we close this session, I hope you've learned something. It's been my honor to bring you these thoughts today. But we have hopefully a working definition of what creativity is. Hopefully we've understood a little bit about how and why we are created beings. Hopefully we've a few approaches that we can adopt to the creative process. A framework, if you like, that we could pursue. A few biblical examples there to show that this is a biblical principle, and we've been able to apply these lessons hopefully in a practical way to your context. You'll obviously apply them to your specific role as a church leader or a ministry director, or whatever it is that you do daily. So let me just finish with this quote from Erwin McManus. A life well lived is the most exquisite work of art. And just remember that, God's character is displayed in what He made. So is ours. And what we make is important because it displays and reflects who we are inside. God made this universe and all things in it, and it's incredible. And it's amazing, and we should glory in what He has created. And we produce, as creative people, we produce stuff. But that's nothing as compared to who we are. And what God makes is nothing in comparison for who He is. So I pray that these thoughts will be an encouragement to you as you continue to create and build God's kingdom. God bless. Thanks for listening.